Hey everybody, tonight's video is called Rebuked by Jesus, and tonight we continue our select study through the Gospel of Mark, where we're going to be looking at Jesus rebuking his disciples in today's section of Mark chapter 8. So, in Mark chapter 8, verse 13, the Pharisees seeked a sign, and verse 13 says, "And he left them, getting into the boat again, departed to the other side." And so Mark 8:13, Jesus went to the northeast shore where Bethsaida was located. Verse 14-15, "Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, Take heed, be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." So this narrative details this passage and the 2 feet of miracles together, and it explains why they have misconstrued Jesus' symbolic warning against the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod, fretting over a lack of physical bread when Jesus is concerned about graver spiritual dangers. And we see the word leaven used a few times in the New Testament, and it's used as an illustration of influence and most often symbolizes the evil influence of sin. And the leaven of the Pharisees included both their false teaching and their hypocritical behavior. And the leaven of Herod Antipas, back in Mark chapter 6, was his immoral, corrupt conduct. And the Pharisees and the Herodians were allied against Jesus, as seen back in Mark chapter 3, verse 6. Verse 16-17, "And they reasoned among themselves, saying, Is it because we have no bread? But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened?" So we see that Jesus' question rebuked the disciples for completely missing the point. And Jesus was concerned about spiritual truth, not mundane physical matters. And they were rebellious and spiritually insensitive and unable to understand spiritual truth. And all they could think about was physical bread that goes into the stomach, not the bread that goes into the soul. In verse 18-21, to finish our section today, it's going to be a pretty short video. Says, "Having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also when I broke the 7 for 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. And so he said to them, How is it you do not understand?" So Jesus had 5 questions further in rebuking the disciples for their hardness of heart. And he also reminded them of his ability to provide anything that they might lack. And I want to look at verse 21 again, where it says, "So he said to them, How is it you do not understand?" And so, how is it do you not understand is an appeal based on the questions that Jesus just asked. And Matthew's parallel account of this section, back in Matthew chapter 16, reveals that the disciples finally understood his point in verse 12. But as I mentioned when we kicked off Mark kind of just gives like a basic point and just drives on, with his points. But Matthew clarifies that they finally understood in Matthew 16:12. And too bad we don't have this passage recorded audibly. I would have loved to hear Jesus speak to them like this. And one thing I'd really be interested in is seeing Jesus' tone of voice that he used. Was he angry? Was it an angry tone of voice? Was it out of concern or frustration? And I don't doubt, though, that his confrontation of his disciples was done in love, because Jesus always spoke the truth in love, even when it stung. And so to wrap up tonight, we looked at Jesus warned of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. And when they asked for a sign from heaven, we're actually going to go back into Matthew's gospel and read Matthew 16:12. It says here, "Then they understood that he did not tell them to be aware of the leaven of bread, but of also the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So the leaven of the Pharisees included their false teaching as well. And I want to go to Luke chapter 12, verse 1. Luke 12:1 says, "And in the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people have gathered together, so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy." So also their hypocritical behavior is compared to leaven. And tonight's section ends with Jesus questioning the 12 disciples about their lack of understanding. And that's going to wrap up our study for today. We'll see you next as we'll be looking at Jesus casting out a stubborn spirit out of a boy. And we are halfway through our select study of the Gospel of Mark. So we're already halfway through our first book of 2026. And I hope to see you back here. I'll let you know when the next video will be. And just want to say God bless. Have a good night.